So, the basis upon the whole thing is, of course, this gentleman here. We all know him, Yul Brynner, as Ramesses II. But, of course, he based the whole thing on what he was told by scholarship, which was that Ramesses II was the pharaoh of the Exodus and the oppression, and that Moses lived in the time of the 19th dynasty, which is when Ramesses was obviously reigning. And that was what we call the Ramesses Exodus theory. Certainly not in the time of Ramesses. Now, the basis for this argument, this negative argument, is this place, Jericho. Joshua then destroyed Jericho around 1210 BC, which is 40 years after 1250 and the Exodus. That's the rough date, approximate date that people place the destruction of Jericho. If we now see where the problem lies, I'm going to use this graphic to do that. Now, it looks fairly simple at the moment, but it's going to get quite complicated in a second, so we're going to have some archaeology here. These phases that you see here are archaeological phases, and here are your conventional datings. Let's now put in the biblical events. So in the Late Bronze 2A, we have part of the Sojourn, which is also earlier. Then in the Late Bronze 2B, this is where we place Moses and the Exodus. And then we have the Judges period in two phases, going through towards the united monarchy of Saul, David, and Solomon. Now, if I put in the Egyptian data to match that, we end up with Akhenaten and Tutankhamun down here, then the famous Ramesses II of the 19th dynasty as the contemporary of Moses in the Late Bronze Age, and then Ramesses III in the 20th dynasty and on back into the Third Intermediate period. This is the period that I've been specializing in. So you begin to see the relationships between the biblical story, the archaeology, and the Egyptian history. This is the conventional scheme. Here we see a fragment of the Royal Canon of Turin, which is a king's list of the pharaohs. And here we get this last sub-dynasty that enslaved the Israelites. Sobekotep III, we have a Brooklyn papyrus with slave lists with Semitic names in there. And then we have Neferhotep, a very powerful king, and Sobekotep IV, who was the one who was the stepfather rather, of Moses. When he died, there's the start of the 13th dynasty. When he died at the bottom of the papyrus, the 29th king, we come to the next column over here. We need to be looking for the pharaoh of the Exodus. So if I go 45 years down, it's approximately 45 because we don't have the exact dates, we come to this little fragment of the papyrus here and the name Dudimose. Remember that name, because he's the pharaoh of the Exodus, not Ramesses II. This nobody. This guy who nobody's ever heard of. He's virtually the last king of the 13th dynasty. And it's his time when this happens, according to Manetho. Have you heard of Manetho? He's the Egyptian priest who wrote a history of the Egyptians, who mentions, quoted in Josephus, who mentions this. And this is quite striking. In the time of a king called Ptolemaios, remember he's writing in Greek again for the Ptolemies. Ptolemaios is Dudimose. In his reign, for what cause I know not, a blast of God smote us. And God here is in the singular. You would expect an Egyptian to be writing, and the gods smote us. But he doesn't. He refers to one God smiting the Egyptians. And he continues, and Kai in Greek, which means what follows on from God smiting. Unexpectedly, from the regions of the east across the Sinai, invaders of obscure race marched in confidence of victory against our land. By main force, they easily seized it without striking a blow. And having overpowered the rulers of the land, they then burned our cities ruthlessly, razed to the ground the temples of the gods, and treated all the natives with cruel hostility, massacring some and leading into slavery the wives and children of others. That is the punishment of Egypt. That is post-Exodus, the invasion of the Hyksos, coming into Egypt, being able to take over the land without striking a blow. There is no army to defend Egypt. Why? It's at the bottom of the sea. So here we are. This is the location now we're dealing with. We're not saying Ramesses in the 19th dynasty was the pharaoh of the Exodus. We're saying it happened down there under Dudimose at the close of the 13th dynasty. And this, 40 years later, or approximately 40 years later, is when we should be looking for a Jericho that was destroyed. So remember our chart. We have the Iron Age town built by Hiel on the body of his two sons in the time of Ahab, circa 800 BC. Then we have, going backwards, the 600-year gap at Jericho. Then we have the destruction of the Middle Bronze Age city, destroyed by Joshua.